Venus, our sister planet, has had a long and colourful history, most of which is sadly lost, even to the Venusians themselves. Still, despite our limited knowledge of their past, humanity has typically been quick to judge and label the Venusians as cowards, even today in the 25th century. Perhaps nothing better demonstrates this prejudice than For Jupiter, the recent award-winning film about the famous civil war between colonists on Jupiter that swept the awards ceremonies on Earth and all of her colonies, yet was banned on Venus for its racist depiction of Venusians as backstabbing opportunists. Whilst there was some controversy over the film, overall I think its success even beyond the Earth colonies demonstrates how this view is sadly shared by most of the Federation. Personally, however, even before learning more about their history, I always viewed the Venusians as simply having a different, perhaps more practical response to a terror that plagues all sentient life, that of the unknown. Some species, such as our future enemies, the Hylaxians, desire to conquer the unknown. Others want to try and understand and find a common ground with whatever might be out there, like the Federation. Humanity, I'd say, falls between those two extremes of conquest and friendship, depending on whether or not the other species we discover can fight back. The Venusians, meanwhile, were content to simply seal their little oasis of life off from the rest of creation, which, in a way, was more admirable, as at least they didn't bring their problems into the rest of the universe. Still, as we will see, this approach led to its own problems, though, considering the chaotic history humanity has endured of invasions and threats from beyond, a serious argument could be made for the Venusians having the more practical approach overall. Until the 23rd century, mainstream scientific belief stated that there was no life on Venus. In fact, we believed it to be a gas giant. However, this was simply the work of a powerful spell by the Venusians to trick any passing or neighbouring life forms into avoiding the planet. The Venusian Delusion ultimately came to an end in the 23rd century, when they were finally forced into helping humanity, beginning their long alliance with us and the Federation that endures to this day in the 25th century. Though even then the Venusians rarely ever took part in anything to do with the Federation, and, as we explored before, the Zeta Reticulans are actually our closest allies. Still, whilst most history records state that the Venusians and humanity didn't ally until the 23rd century, fortunately, I know better. There were many visitations between the two worlds for centuries before, but the most important, and the one we will be examining in detail, is the journey Carla King made in the early 21st century. In order to understand this journey's significance, however, we will first have to explore a very basic history of Venus, based on the limited knowledge we have. As those of you reading in the 25th century know, what we think of as Venusians are actually refugees from the planet Earth. Over 66 million years ago, during the age of the dinosaurs, our planet was visited by a race of aliens known as the Raxians, who abducted several species of dinosaur to use in their own civil war. The winning side would then go on to create many colonies on other planets and, in some cases, brought dinosaurs to them. In fact, some worlds were populated entirely by dinosaurs, including Venus. The Raxians still had many uses for the great reptiles and felt that having other planets full of them would mean that they didn't have to keep exploiting the Earth's resources. At that point, our sister planet was a beautiful jungle world, just as it is today, but it was populated by primitive amphibian-like creatures, the actual native Venusians. Sadly, very few of these creatures would survive the introduction of the dinosaurs, who in no time came to dominate this world just like they had our own. The great land-dwelling reptiles weren't the only creatures to be brought to Venus, however. The great marine reptiles such as plesiosaurs, ichthyosaurs, as well as many species of prehistoric fish, including sharks, the flying reptiles known as the pterosaurs, and even several species of mammals, were all transported to help balance out the reptiles' ecosystem. Today, there is only one native Venusian species left, a large, amphibious, predatory creature known as a crasvox. Ironically, it is one of the most dangerous and feared predators on 25th century Venus. The extinction of the dinosaurs on Earth is believed to have happened just a few centuries after they became established on Venus. As we know, the reign of the dinosaurs came to an end thanks to Castran, the ancient, powerful demon and future father of the vampires. His spirit arrived on Earth after a failed attempt to resurrect him from his death millions of years ago, and he soon took over the body of a dead Tyrannosaurus Rex. After exterminating the dinosaurs on Earth and turning a few survivors into his new army of demons, Castran did visit Venus, but fortunately the Raxians launched an attack against him before he could wipe out life there as well. The demon was forced to temporarily flee, as he was not at full power. He later destroyed the Raxians' home planet in an act of spite once he was stronger, ironically using his tyrannosaur body, which he kept from this point on. Venus, however, survived, simply because by that point Castran had too many of his former enemies after him to bother with a small, insignificant planet. The dinosaurs and other Earth species on Venus, meanwhile, continued to evolve over the next 66 million years into unique life forms. Whilst the dinosaurs remained dominant overall, several species of mammals also grew to large sizes, in certain areas of Venus too, though none were ever able to evolve into life forms as intelligent as human beings. The dinosaurs of Venus were officially referred to within the Federation as Exosaurs, which means alien or distant reptile, with this name having been coined centuries ago, though who by is still somewhat unclear. Still, ultimately, the Exosaurs do belong to the dinosaurian group of reptiles in much the same way birds do, so if you want to refer to them as such, that's fine too. Generally speaking, dinosaurs, birds, exosaurs, and all the other distinct dinosaur species that would evolve on the Raskian colonies would be referred to collectively as saurians, a new group that encompasses dinosaurs and their wider range of descendants, though saurians in general are grouped under archosaurs as well. Among the dinosaur species that had relocated to Venus included Tyrannosaurus rex, at that point the dominant predator on the Earth, Triceratops, numerous species of hadrosaurs, sauropods, and dromaeosaurs. In addition to the current species, the Raskians also revived several extinct species of dinosaurs on Earth, such as Spinosaurus and Allosaurids, using technology that is still in advance of what we have now. The Tyrannosaurus naturally evolved into the largest and most powerful predators on the planet. Tyrannosaurus rex itself became Asprometeosaurus rex, or white-eyed lizard king. These beasts could grow to over 70 feet long and stand over 30 feet tall and weighed in at over 40 tons. Their body plan was somewhat similar to a Tyrannosaurus, though their skin was black with a gold underside, and their eyes were completely and utterly white, hence their name. An A-Rex possessed a ferociously powerful bite force of well over 30 tons and teeth far longer, thicker and stronger than those of any other exosaur. In addition to this, the A-Rexes were also incredibly intelligent. In fact, some to this day have even argued that these exosaurs possess a certain degree of sentience, though this is a minority view. At the very least, the A-Rexes do possess staggering long-term memory, problem-solving, and social skills, to the point where they are known to gather in what can almost be described as communities, though in spite of this, they still hunt alone. There have even been stories of the A-Rexes targeting and killing Venusians and human colonists who have hurt or slain one member of their pack or community, though some have simply argued that the Exosaurs are trying to root out those intruding on their territory regardless. The most feared exosaur on Venus, even today in the 25th century, is what is known as the Emperor Rex, the largest and most dominant male of any community of A-Rexes. The bulk of these males are often, in contrast to the alphas of other animal species, the oldest due to their sheer size. It is believed that some of these alpha males may even exceed the highest estimates, with the largest and most notorious individual named Jorskis that was said to have wiped out one of the first Earth colonies on Venus, possibly exceeding 90 feet in length. The A-Rexes also possess much more refined senses than those of any other exosaur too, though naturally they are not the fastest animals. They nevertheless overcompensated for this in a number of ways. To start with, their sheer size ensures that one step for an A-Rex is comparable to half a dozen for a creature the size of a human. They also have incredible stamina that can allow them to pursue their prey for potentially hours. Finally, the A-Rexes, despite their size, are also incredibly agile and capable of short bursts of speed, which, coupled with their senses, allow the A-Rexes to be the perfect ambush killers. Their effectiveness was only heightened by the fact that just one bite from these animals could kill even the largest exosaur. Virtually no other giant carnivore dares to challenge the A-Rex. Absolutely none can match their incredible aggression alone, never mind their power. Ironically, the only animal that is aggressive enough to challenge an A-Rex is a Krasvox, though even then, most of the time these great predators will retreat when confronted with an Emperor Rex. Just as on Earth, the Tyrannosaurus dominated anywhere they lived, though the A-Rexes were not the only members of the Tyrannosaur family on Venus. The Dilophosaurus rex, or poisoned-breathed lizard king, grew to over 60 feet long and weighed in at over 25 tons. They also possessed the same basic Tyrannosaur body plan, but in contrast to the A-Rex, their skin was bright red, with black horizontal stripes running down their necks, backs and tails, and an orange underbelly. Their eyes, meanwhile, were completely black, except for a vertical, stripe-like red pupil. The only major difference the animals had physically to the usual Tyrannosaur body plan were two backward-facing horns at the back of their skulls. Whilst the Dilophosaurus possessed the strong bite force typical of Tyrannosaurs, being able to bite with a force over 20 tons, their main weapon was the poison they were able to emit from their venom sacs in their stomachs as a kind of noxious breath that could spread over an area of up to 10 feet. The poison was more than capable of killing smaller animals, such as humans, in a very short space of time, though it could also bring down some of the largest and most powerful exosaurs over longer periods, in a very protracted and painful way. However, their poison breath was still not strong enough to take down the A-Rexes, who were the Dilophosaurus's only threat. The poison breath, though an effective weapon, was also often used more for defense than hunting. Another species of Tyrannosaurus was a Thalassosaurus rex, sea-dwelling lizard king. These animals did not evolve from Tyrannosaurus rex specifically, but rather other members of the Tyrannosaur family. They were much smaller than the average Tyrannosaur, growing up to just 20 feet long and standing about 9 feet tall and weighing in at about 2 tons. These animals, as their name suggested, were semi-aquatic. They possessed a similar body plan to most tyrannosaurs, though their arms were slightly larger than the average tyrannosaur, and they possessed 3 fingers. Their tails, meanwhile, were more like paddles, whilst their toes and fingers were webbed to help them swim through the Venusian waters. The animal's skin, meanwhile, was light blue, though they were also covered in green spots. Finally, a long orange fin, though not as pronounced as that of a Spinosaurus, ran down each Thalassosaurus's back and tail. The Thalassosaurus were amongst the most intelligent of all Exosaurs, and were just as effective hunters on land as they were in the ocean. They possessed a greater speed and agility than any other known Exosaur, or indeed dinosaur on Earth either, and appeared to split their time between the land and the water at different points in their life. They were also among the most social tyrannosaurs, with large males once again serving as the alphas of each pack. The largest of the allosaurs, meanwhile, was the Anoxosaurus, spring-heeled lizard. Measuring over 50 feet in length and weighing in at 8 tons, these animals had completely albino skin and stood upright like kangaroos. They were considerably more agile and quick on their feet than the giant tyrannosaurs. In fact, they were the fastest of all the large killers, which served them well in hunting the giant sauropods who could have swatted them easily. Whilst not as powerful as the A-Rexes, they were arguably the most numerous of the giant killers, though in any area they did cohabit with the tyrannosaurs, they were always subservient, and even fell prey to them on occasion too. Still, generally speaking, the Anoxosaurus were the apex predators of their environments. Spinosaurus, on the other hand, gave rise to 2 large alpha predators with very different lifestyles. The Trypomosaurus were the most common, growing up to 60 feet long and weighing in at 10 tons. These killers burrowed deep into the earth, only emerging from below the ground for mating and to snatch unwary prey. Their bodies were a lot more flexible and almost snake-like, and they could move with a lightning speed despite their size. Physically, the Trypomosaurus resembled a Spinosaurus from Earth, but rather than the famous sail, it possessed an armoured back covered in long, backwards-facing spikes. Its jaws were also somewhat shorter, stalkier, and considerably stronger too, though the claws on its hands were over twice the size of Spinosaurus and were still its main weapons. Often, the vice-like jaws were simply used to hold on to its prey, whilst the claws disemboweled them. The other species of Spinosaur, meanwhile, in contrast, was the first fully aquatic species of non-avian dinosaur, or exosaur. Known as Scelicosaurus, worm lizard, this animal was named as such due to its unusual body plan. Its head and upper body still resembled the Spinosaurus of Earth to some extent, with the same crocodilian head, longer arms, though the sail had now transformed into more of a sharp fin. However, they also had no legs, with a long serpentine body taking the place of the entire lower body of an Earth Spinosaurus. The Scelicosaurus were actually the longest of all the meat-eaters on Venus, growing to up to 90 feet long. However, they were among the lightest, weighing in at only 7 tons. What they may have lacked in strength and mass, they made up for in speed, and were extremely effective hunters of both marine and any land animals that were unlucky enough to stray too close to the water. Much like their Trypomosaurus relatives, their jaws were shorter and more robust than their Spinosauran cousins on Earth, and their claws were actually the largest of any meat-eating dinosaur. Among the giant herbivores, meanwhile, included many species of sauropod dinosaur, some of which eventually came to dwarf those on Earth. Many attribute the greater growth and strength of the Venusian dinosaurs to the Raxians, tampering with the original dinosaurs that were brought to Venus's DNA. The Raxians naturally wanted their dinosaurs to be larger, stronger, and more intelligent to serve as soldiers and mounts. Whatever the case, whilst there were many species of giant sauropod, the two most notable examples were the Gargantuosaurus, simply gargantuan lizard, which is believed to have reached a size close to 250 tons and over 200 feet in length, and the Unisaurus, the most numerous species. These animals could reach a length of over 100 feet long and exceed 90 tons in weight. Their body plan resembled that of the typical sauropod, except they had spikes running down from the top of their necks to the tips of their tails. They also possessed a single, long horn on their foreheads, which is where their names were derived from. Many of the earliest human expeditions to Venus described these beasts as Dinosaur Unicorns. The ceratopsians, meanwhile, also thrived and underwent many new and strange developments. The most numerous and successful of the Venusian ceratopsians was the Monoceratops, single-horned face. Again, this exosaur had, in contrast to its Triceratops ancestor, a single but much longer and stronger horn on its forehead. It was also up to twice the size of a Triceratops, being close to 60 feet long and over 40 tons in weight. Just as on our Earth, the Monoceratops' main predators were the Tyrannosaurus, particularly the A. rex. However, one key difference between the ceratopsians of Earth and the Monoceratops was that they were omnivores, though they still mostly preferred vegetables. Now and again they were observed hunting and feasting on small dinosaurs and even some human colonists. Another species of ceratopsian, meanwhile, a relative of the Monoceratops, was an obligate carnivore, known as the Sarcophosaurus, meat-eating lizard. This ceratopsian had no horns, but an incredibly strong and powerful set of jaws filled with razor-sharp teeth. It was also considerably faster than the average exosaur, being able to run up to 40 miles per hour, and whilst it may not have had horns, it did have 3 rows of small spikes running down its back and longer claws on its feet. The Ankylosaurus also thrived on Venus, evolving into a bipedal creature known as the Polemosaurus, warrior lizard. It lost its tail, whilst its armour became even more pronounced, and its forelegs developed into strong, incredibly powerful arms. The Polemosaurus were still vegetarians, but they were also among the most aggressive animals on the planet. At 12 tons in weight, the largest males of each herd never backed down from confrontations with any predator, except for the A. rex, of course. They delivered absolutely brutal beatdowns to their enemies and used their bodies to crush them. Stegosaurus, on the other hand, which was revived by the Raxians, underwent a somewhat similar transformation. Its descendants, known as the Triachemosaurus, 3-spiked reptile, adopted a semi-bipedal stance similar to a modern-day bear. It also adopted an omnivorous diet too. This species' name came from 3 rows of smaller spike-like plates up and down its back. Unlike its ancestors, it also possessed a shorter, stubbier tail, the end of which was completely covered in spikes. Finally, they also had incredibly long spikes on their hands, which were primarily used for stripping leaves off of Venusian trees, but could double as extremely effective weapons. Overall, the animals weighed in at 9 tons and grew to almost 40 feet in length. The hadrosaurs, however, were undoubtedly the most successful species of plant-eating exosaur on the planet. There were believed to be up to 30 species on Venus, though by far the most numerous was the Athysaurus, eagle reptile, a 70-foot-long, 20-ton species. Whilst it had the same basic body plan as most hadrosaurs, much like the Anoxosaurus, it stood upright like a kangaroo and had long talons on its hands and feet, which it used as weapons. The animal's kick was incredibly powerful in particular, and could allow it to disembowel some of the largest and most dangerous carnivores. Whilst there were literally hundreds of different dinosaur species on Venus, the most prominent would ultimately be the Dromaeosaur family. These small, feathered meat-eating dinosaurs, who, back on Earth, gave rise to such famous killers as Deinonychus, Velociraptor, on Venus would produce just 3 species: the Exoraptor, the Velociraptor, and Athyco, the ancestors of the Venusians as we know them today. The Exoraptors were most like the Dromaeosaurs of Earth, small, feathered, agile killers. They grew to about 15 or so feet long and weighed about as much as a man. Where they differed, however, from killers like Deinonychus was that they had evolved wings, making them a second species of flying theropod after the birds of Earth. Their feet, however, still retained the signature sickle-like claw of most dromaeosaurs, which had actually grown longer and stronger over the course of 66 million years, to the point where it could be used to impale its victims, though their jaws were still strong and contained very sharp and powerful teeth. The animals were also feathered, even on their feet, unlike modern-day birds. The only areas that weren't feathered were their snouts and long, flexible, snake-like tails. Velociraptors, meanwhile, looked almost exactly the same, except they were considerably larger, with the biggest females growing up to 28 feet long. The Athyco, meanwhile, in contrast, became more terrestrial than even many of the dromaeosaur species of Earth, who it is known still lived and hunted in trees. These raptors, over the course of 66 million years, underwent a series of adaptations, which eventually led to them evolving into a more humanoid form. Though it is worth mentioning that in actual fact, they developed it before we did, and in many respects, they were better suited to a humanoid form than we were, due to their reptilian and avian anatomy. Still, we humans, like all species in fairness, tend to put ourselves at the centre of things. Ultimately, the humanoid form is a successful form, hence why so many species have adopted it through convergent evolution, but it is far from the only successful form for sentient life. We only tend to think it is because naturally we tend to associate with other humanoids. The Athyco, meanwhile, developed a more upright posture due to their brain size increasing, which eventually led to a more enlarged, what we would call humanoid skull. Their beak-like mouths also became much smaller than those of other meat-eating dinosaurs or exosaurs, whilst their forearms not only became longer, but more flexible too. They were able to move their hands in any direction they wanted, unlike other meat-eating dinosaurs and exosaurs, whose hands always have to face each other. Just as humans mostly lost their hair, so did the Athyco lose their feathers, except for a feathered strip at the top of their heads, which, similarly, was longer and more prominent in females of the species. They did not stand completely upright, however, like Homo sapiens, and as a result, on average, they were much smaller in height. This was undoubtedly due to the fact that they kept their long, serpentine tails. In many respects, their body plan was actually shaped more like that of a monkey, though they spent less time on all fours. Like most theropods, from birds to dromaeosaurs, the Athyco possessed hollow bones. Contrary to popular belief, however, hollow bones do not make an animal weaker physically. Hollow bones have a reinforced outer coating to overcompensate, which makes them stronger than mammalian bones. As a result of this, Athyco on average possessed physical strength up to 5 times that of a human being. Meanwhile, avian brains are also capable of holding a greater amount of neurons than those of mammalians. It is this feature that allows modern-day crows to possess greater intelligence than many species of primate, despite having smaller brains. Athyco's brains, however, appeared to combine the greater size of mammalian brains whilst retaining the greater number of neurons from avian brains. Whilst we would never admit it, on average, the Athyco appeared to possess a greater intelligence than human beings, and to this day we know that their knowledge of magics greatly eclipses ours. Finally, the Athyco also still laid eggs, which again made childbirth much safer and considerably less painful. Sadly, one of the drawbacks of mammalian humanoids is our upright posture and larger heads, which can lead to dangerous complications and difficulties when giving birth to live young. The Athyco eventually built a highly advanced civilization sometime before humanity even evolved. They are believed to have relied on magic rather than science like we do, and their mastery of the black arts led to the Athyco placing a magical force field around Venus, which not only protected it physically, but again created an illusion to any passerby that Venus was an uninhabitable wasteland not worth bothering with. Quite why, or indeed when, the Athyco created the force field, no one is really sure. It may have happened after Castran's second invasion of Earth, when humanity had already emerged, and he would create his vile children, the vampires, or perhaps even after the renegade god Set's attack. Alternatively, there may have been an invasion of Venus, but either way, something from the very depths of space terrified the Athyco to the extent that they lost all desire to explore the universe common to most species and retreated into their own world. In spite of this seclusion, it is known that the elites of the Athyco society travelled to Earth and possibly other worlds too. There are few records in some ancient cultures of creatures said to come from the stars that match that of Athyco, and it appears the reptiles may have helped influence certain cultures on our world for their own interests. There is one documented case of a king trading unique and powerful earth magics with a creature matching an Athyco elite in exchange for an A-Rex tamed through magics. Ultimately, however, the king's control over the A-Rex didn't last, and the beast destroyed his entire kingdom. This is detailed in the king's own diaries, though he obviously did not name the mighty dragon he was given ownership of as an A-Rex, but the skeleton of the beast that died was identified many years later as that of one of the kings of Venus. The true extent of the relationship between Venus and Earth during this period will never be known, as at some point the Athyco warred with one another. Their use of powerful magics ended up destroying their entire civilization, though the force field remained intact. The surviving Athyco were scattered. Some held on to scant traces of their society for a short while, whilst many were reduced to barbarians. Furthermore, the magics used in their war had led to others of their kind mutating and twisting into hideous abominations too. The jungles of Venus subsequently grew over most of the ruins of their cities as the wild Exosaurs once again came to dominate. By the 21st century, most traces of the Athyco's ancient society had vanished. Even today, very little is known about them, sadly, though there are historians from both Venus and Earth that are devoted to trying to uncover their history. So far, their efforts have not been rewarded. The force field, meanwhile, due to centuries of unstable magic polluting the planet from within, began to break up. Parts of it drifted into space, others crashed onto the Earth, leading to catastrophe in certain regions. One such crash in the town of Hampson alerted Carla King in the year 2025, and in the next article we shall explore her journey to save both Venus and her own world.